Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm JJ Flazanes, your producer and empowerment strategist. Thank you for downloading today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about the common diseases caused by mold and Lyme. What is going on right now actually started yesterday. I apologize, is if you're on my email list, you got the notification ahead of time. But if you're listening just here, and it's the only way you connect with me, there is a 5-day mold and Lyme summit going on for both people who have had mold and Lyme or possibly have symptoms, and also practitioners who treat mold and Lyme. And that is jjflazanes.com/mold. Today's show is with Dr. Diane Mueller. I'll tell you a little bit about her in a second. Again, don't forget to look at the show notes if you have any inclination or if you've dealt with mold or Lyme or you know of someone who's dealt with mold or Lyme. Go to jjflazanes.com/mold to register for this free 5-day summit. I have opened the doors to the Law of Attraction Mastery course, and there's only a couple weeks to sign up. We start June 1st. This course will be live in June every Tuesday for the first 4 Tuesdays, and you don't have to come live, but I just wanted to invite you because I know some of you listen to the show and you feel like, oh man, I missed that course that was live. It's only ever going to be live once, and then you can buy it in the future. It'll be at the same exact link. You'll just have access to get the videos and the lessons and the teachings right away. So we're doing it live for the very first time, and you can get more information about that at jjflazanes.com/mastery. And I'm going to put that link in the show notes also. One last quick announcement also is at the end of May 31st, will be the last day for the early bird pricing, especially the 5-pay plan, for the Manifestation Bootcamp in October. So if you've wanted to come to a JJ Live event, you wanted to be a part of the community, you want to up-level your manifestation even to the next level and really get the cellular benefits of being around the community, you have a couple weeks left to grab your ticket at the early bird pricing for the Manifestation Bootcamp in October. And that is jjflazanes.com/bootcamp. Again, all the links are in the show notes. So as a survivor of IBS, Lyme disease, and mold illness, Dr. Mueller is passionate about bringing research, understanding, and compassion to those with these diseases. She has co-authored with her husband, Dr. Nichols, a book which is to be released now, it's available now, in May of 2021, called Use Your Mind to Heal Your Mold and Lyme. Her practice, the Medicine with Heart Clinic, treats those around the country. She also co-owns an online functional medicine school and the Medicine with Heart Institute, where she trains clinicians around the world in functional medicine. And you can learn more about her and all the links, how to buy her book, her 14-day happiness challenge. All the links are in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and please share it with anyone who you suspect may have some of these symptoms and can't figure out the cause. Welcome to the show, Dr. Diane.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, JJ. So thrilled to be here.
Well, I manifested you definitely because I have been dealing with this intuitive hit that my cat and this place that we're in have some mold issues. Now I'm moving, and by the time this comes out, I will have moved. But currently, I've never really thought about it. And there's just been all these different indicators and manifestations, if you will, of whether it be books or symptoms or people talking about it. And so when you showed up, I'm like, oh my God, we're going to have this discussion about not only mold, but Lyme disease. And I know people with Lyme disease who are still suffering. So welcome to the show. I can't wait to get this conversation started.
Oh, I'm so excited too. And you just are already hitting on such a great point about how many people are sick just because they're living in this place and they don't realize that their home is making them ill. And oftentimes one member of the household's sick and other members are not. And that in itself is so confusing to people. So I'm so glad you figured this out so quickly about your house.
Well, it's like a condo townhouse kind of thing. It was a transitional place from the last house to the next house. And I know it's a thing, but because I don't own this, nor did I own the last one, I would not necessarily be ripping into walls or knowing what to look for necessarily or how to deal with it. So this is going to be not only for everybody out there, it's going to be for me too. In fact, I even had the inspection people come, like the air quality and environmental pollution, if you will, come to my house, my new house, and already test for mold in certain places. But I'd love to, have that conversation also today. But let's first start off about your background in terms of being integrative medicine, functional medicine, and a little bit about your story getting into medicine. And was
it because of the conditions that you were dealing with, or was it after?
Because like so many people, I got into this world because I was stuck in this area that so many people are, of having so many different symptoms and problems, and all the conventional standard tests I was running said I was normal. And, the diagnosis at that point sometimes is just depression or it's in your head. And I knew it wasn't. And so that was a large part of what got me into naturopathic medical school, and studying medicine was largely derived around, hey, I fell into this group like so many people do, where the labs are normal, but the symptoms are clearly there. And at one point it was so bad that I was actually considering just moving to like finding some sort of island or some sort of place in the Caribbean where I could live really cheaply and just basically like live until I died, because that's what I thought was happening to me. My symptoms were just so unexplainable and so bad. And then when I started learning things and started applying what I was learning to myself, I started coming out of the fog and the crazy symptom picture.
Let's talk about what your symptoms were and when did they start, and what was your first test? Let's go through that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So initially it started actually pre-mold, pre-Lyme, which is chronic constipation, IBS, sometimes going a couple weeks without a bowel movement, those types of things. So that was the initial start to something being wrong and getting into holistic medicine. And then once I was in medical school, what started happening then was much more related to Lyme and mold from a symptom picture. So for example, I was starting to have these things that I would call episodes. And what an episode was for me is where I would get really dissociated and really confused. So I would leave my house, even when I was feeling really bad. I had a lot of fibromyalgia, so just constantly in pain, constantly fatigued. And I would leave my house to go for like a 5-minute walk around the block every day. It was all I could manage, but I just had to get outside. And so I would go for these 5-minute walks. And sometimes these episodes would happen where I'd be a couple blocks from my house and I would get like disoriented. I would get lost in space and time. It was almost like this out of body experience where I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where I lived. And so I would just wind up sitting down, and they wouldn't last long, minutes, not even like 10 minutes, usually like 2 to 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden the cloud would disappear, and I would kind of come back into my body and remember like, oh, this is where I am. This is where I live. So scary stuff like that would happen. I was having weird neurological symptoms of loss of feeling in my extremities, headaches, migraines, these sorts of things. Couldn't sleep, had really bad insomnia. And so much was really blamed on that time period when lab tests were generally normal. It was really kind of blamed on medical school syndrome. I was tired. I was pushing really hard. And when I graduated, and about 6 months after I graduated, a lot of my friends were saying, wow, we are coming back to life. We're feeling better. And I wasn't. And that's when I started doing a lot more testing. In school, I did the basics, solid adrenal tests and stool cultures and breath tests, looking for all sorts of different abnormalities in my hormonal systems and my adrenal systems and my gastrointestinal tract, and found some stuff, but nothing that was revolutionary. And so then when my friends were feeling better and I was getting worse and I started doing more lab tests, that's when I found Lyme and Babesia and Bartonella and a huge level of mold markers that were elevated.
Who found them?
I did.
Mm-hmm. And was it something, because I know I work with a naturopath also, and I know that there's a whole, and in integrative medicine in general, right? They do more environmental than Western.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I could have gone and worked with somebody else, but it's so interesting in the Lyme world, so many people that are integrative, that are natural, are still using heavy courses of antibiotics. And I think there's reason to have, in my opinion, there's reason to have as many tools in the toolbox as possible. But for me, and where I was with my history of gastrointestinal problems, I really did not feel like the antibiotic route was right for me. So that's when I figured like, I got to figure this out for myself, because I couldn't find somebody that I really felt comfortable from a treatment perspective to work with. So I just basically started going through the work of joining ILADs, interviewing other doctors that were treating it, and getting pieces of information here. And then just basically spending all of my time with as much brain power as I could muster during that time on the couch, just reading and researching and reading and researching until I felt like I could put together a solid treatment plan.
I relate to the story because I had fibroids. And while I even worked with, let's say, healers, one in the beginning who I liked a lot she was really good at diagnosing things. But when it came to the treatment, and she was kind of old school, she said, well, surgery is really the only way. And so I took that and I went and had the contacts with the doctors. But I was hysterically crying every time. And I thought maybe, well, my marriage is kind of falling apart. And not too long after I got divorced. So I was thinking maybe that's what that was about. But it took about 3 or 4 times having this surgery conversation of me just sobbing hysterically that I was like, JJ, hello, your body does not agree with this. You do not think this is the way to go. You do not believe that this is the only answer. And so then the next 2 years, the path just was me trusting and trying things and listening to my body until finally, when I was looking at the uterine artery embolization at the time, it was told, well, if you ever want to get pregnant, then don't do this. It was dangerous. You'd be infertile, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay. So then 2 years passed and my intuition said, check it again. And as you probably well know in medicine, right? Things change all the time. Research is happening. People are testing different things. I checked it. Now it's the fertility preserver. Now it's like the darling of, so I sort of just took, and I went into the doctor and I made the appointment and she looked at me like, well, didn't a gynecologist refer you? And I said, no. So it was one of those like self-diagnosis from all I needed her to do was the procedure. And I was pretty clear if she didn't want to do it, I was going to find someone else that was going to do it. And it wasn't like, I didn't mean I wasn't trying to be an arrogant person about it. Like I just knew what I needed. And she's like, but I'm the expert and I'm the one to tell you if you need it or not. Anyway, so it was like, okay, I get it. I'm here because you're really good at this. But her first recommendation was hysterectomy for me. And I'm like, yeah, it was beyond. And I had done a podcast with a doctor years ago about how she had a hysterectomy. And now she's like wanting to empower women. Do not. There are so many ways to heal even cancers that you think are going to take you down without losing your uterus. But it's the idea that, you were a doctor and you were treating yourself. But you also learned about all of these things to be able to treat yourself. And what I love about using this information and coming from that integrative medicine perspective, again, is the looking at the environment, which is something that I don't think Western does maybe at all.
I totally agree. I mean, I think when like back in the day where Louis Pasteur gave us the germ theory of disease, which was so beneficial to know, right? That saved so many lives in surgery when we actually started realizing that there were these microorganisms, these pathogens that were causing disease and problems in people. So the germ theory of disease was amazing. But like so many things in medicine, I think sometimes we hang on to these, these tiny little teachings that sometimes are major, but we forget about the entirety. And that's what I think has largely happened, unfortunately, with the conventional medicine model is, yes, germs do cause disease. Absolutely. We have all sorts of microorganisms. What's going on in the world is a clear example of that. But we've kind of lost sight of the fact in medicine that what is going on in our environment, our home, the metals in the air, the pesticides, the glyphosates, all the things, plus what's going on in our own body around our own immune dysregulation. A lot of the reason why germs cause disease in many cases is because our immune system is so taxed from everything that we're doing, everything we're consuming, everything in our air environment, that we're not able to appropriately fight things. So I think we've kind of gotten to this point where we've reduced medicine down almost and made it too simple and kind of forgotten that how we live, what we're exposed to is a huge part of the health of the human being.
Without a doubt. I live near the airport and I can't tell you how. I've lived near the airport now for 12 years, I think. We're moving, but I can see how over time, like when we travel, I don't blow my nose in the morning. I don't sneeze. And while I'm not going to say I feel like it's super, like it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it hasn't impacted my health. Like I'm not so sensitive to it that it took me down right away. It's been a slow degeneration over time, just like anything like leaky gut or when you take meds and of course just breaks you down. So, but it is absolutely the environment has an impact. And so it's so silent and deadly. I want to go back to the mold here because that's even worse, especially black mold, right? Can you tell us about, because when people think of mold, they think of green mold that they see obviously on the outside of, let's say, food, or maybe a mushroom. Like in my old house, we did have a mushroom that grew out of the ceiling once, which was funny. Right. So let's talk about, and then also mold in terms of if there's any kinds of good mold. Like as I say that right now, are there kinds like mushrooms? Are there good forms of mold and bad forms of mold?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much. It's such an important thing. I can get into like a really big soapbox here. So basically, yeah, a lot of times you're right. When people are thinking about mold or thinking about what grows on food, black mold is known as Stachybotrys, and black mold is thought to be, from the perspective of the toxins that the mold produces, the most pathogenic mold out there. So some of the problem with mold is that we can get mold spores growing inside of our body, but the reason they tend to make us sick is usually the toxins. So the toxins can be that the mold spores are growing inside of our body producing toxins. The toxins can also be that there's just mold growing in the walls of our house and we're breathing in those toxins. And I want to make sure that everybody listening is clear that most of the time when we're seeing black mold, like black colored mold on the tiles of our say shower, that's most of the time not the black mold that we're talking about. That is the really toxic type of mold. Black mold that we're talking about is very, very common. Stachybotrys, like I said, is its name. And typically it needs a continued water source of a couple weeks in order for it to really grow. But we are linking this type of black mold to all sorts of crazy neurological diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. It's linked to fibro. It's linked to cardiovascular problems. The list is really on and on and on. So that type of mold typically for most people it can be on surfaces. Absolutely. You can see it visibly. But for many people, it's growing behind the drywall. And oftentimes how a house is set up is going to really lead us to developing black mold. For example, I had a patient who had black mold in her attic. And the reason it was in her attic is because the way the exhaust was set up in the bathroom is that the exhaust fan, instead of going outside and blowing that moisture and that humidity outside, that exhaust fan was actually driving that air to the attic. So every time the fan went on, that air is driven into the attic. That humidity over time was that continued humid source. And that's how that black mold developed. So it's really important that people understand that just because you don't see it, just because you don't smell it, does not mean you don't have it.
Which is why I invested in at least the first round of testing of this house that I will be owning very shortly. And hopefully by this moment I own and am in it, but I did not test the attic. Now I just did bedroom and guest bathroom because that's what I'll be using. And they had to take a sample outside. So I just did some basic places where I'm going to be spending the most amount of time, but I didn't think to do the attic. So in terms of that exhaust, is that abnormal or is that normal? What you just described in terms of how the exhaust is set up?
It's from the clients that I've interviewed, it seems to be more abnormal, but things that are normal and common in home development and home building that are really important to watch out for are a couple things. One, the awning. So like how the awning, the place that kind of hangs over the house, you really want to look for houses that have at least 6 inches of that awning. So sometimes I'll just do this experiment when I'm driving through neighborhoods of just, especially if I'm not the one as the driver and I can really pay attention, is to really just look around and see how many of these houses have this at least 6 inches hanging over their house. And so many of them do not, which is problematic because if it's just a couple inches, then the water, when it rains, when it snows and it melts, then that water winds up dripping too close to the house and can actually seep into the foundation and cause mold that way. So that's really common. And then another thing that's really common is to look actually at where the foundation and the earth meet. And you really want to make sure that the slope of the earth is kind of slightly downhill away from the foundation of the house, because if it's moving towards the house, then obviously we can get into that same problem of water draining towards the house and causing that problem. So those are a couple things to watch out for. The other area that is notorious for growing mold, also from this kind of moisture accumulation problem, are crawl spaces. So sometimes people will actually kind of seal off the crawl space to make sure that there's not air traveling from a crawl space to the house in order to make sure that they're keeping their house safe. So if something is affected in the crawl space, you're not getting that leakage of those mycotoxins into the house.
Good to know as I'm getting ready. Now, I had them come in and do air samples, right? So is that the best way to test for mold in a house?
Air samples are definitely an important component, but it's not going to be the only component. So super heavy molds like Stacky, like the black mold, it's heavy. So the heavy molds don't tend to suspend in air. They actually land on dust because they're heavy. And dust is a little bit of a carbohydrate, and molds also love carbohydrates as a food source. So we'll see that sometimes if you just do air samples without also doing the dust sample, you can actually have a false negative thinking you're fine because the mold actually isn't in the air. It's on the surfaces in the dust. So it's good to look at it in both places to be thorough.
Okay. Well, once I get in the house, we're going to start doing more. I just wanted to do a sort of a basic gauge of where things are. And of course, they sent me the report, which I can only read to the best of my ability. Someone like you could probably read it better. So I'm just looking at ranges. But let's talk about symptoms, because I want everyone who's listening to really check in with themselves about symptoms that maybe they have, like you were talking about, that maybe you've done all the other things. And for me, when I look at health on a person, and I'll be working closely with another naturopathic doctor who deals with cancer to work with patients on the emotional piece. And for me, and I know that you do this as well in terms of the emotions, in terms of addressing all of the things that emotions can do. In fact, your new book coming out is called Use Your Mind to Heal Your Mold and Lyme,
Correct.
right. So there's an important piece here in the emotional piece, which to me is very under talked about. It's very underplayed in medicine. It's poo-pooed. It's not something you can test for on a lab necessarily. So it hasn't really been given what I think is the respect, in terms of contributing to your health, minus Bruce Lipton's book, Biology of Belief, and all of his work and things like that. And epigenetics, which is now something most people should be aware of. If not, please look into it. I've done some shows. You guys can go back and listen to those shows. But I want to talk about, okay, so if you've done the medical, biological kind of testing, like you're talking about, you've done labs, you've done other tests, not necessarily environmental tests yet. I want to get to that. And I want you to help us know what to ask for. If you help people with it, they can come to you. If they can do it on their own, like for a lot of clients who want to get blood work and they can't find a doctor near them who will do it, they go to Life Extension, right? So just like things like what they can work with you on or their doctor, or what they can do by themselves. But before we get to the testing, because you don't need to spend a lot of money on testing yet until you figure out if you have symptoms, what are some of the major common symptoms of undetected mold in the body?
It's such an important question. So mold and actually Lyme are both really the great mimickers. So it gets a little complicated because there's so many different ways that mold can present in the body. So one of the things that I see most commonly is pain, whether it's headaches or migraines or classic like joint type of pain that some people might say, like maybe I'm getting rheumatoid arthritis or those types of things. So fibromyalgia, any of the like any of these types of pain type of syndromes are almost always present with mold. But like I said, it's the great mimicker. So it's not always that way. Other things, chronic fatigue is a big one. Night sweats is a big one. So a lot of times with mold, we get a lot of temperature dysregulation. So sometimes women will think like, gosh, am I going into early menopause? But it's actually mold in their body where they're realizing that they're getting these waves of heat. And oftentimes the insomnia comes from waking up with these waves of heat. We can see worsening of things like PMS, depression, anxiety are really common, irritability, especially like a type of rage, like where people are feeling fairly normal and fairly common, and somebody just says something and all of a sudden they feel this like intense emotion of anger or just being, really pissed off come over them kind of out of nowhere. That can be a big mold thing. So there's a lot of different symptoms. And so in addition to having any of these different types of symptoms I'm talking about, and I should also throw brain fog and neurological issues like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, these kind of neurological and dementia related diseases can also be rooted in mold. So the other big thing though, that I think is just the number one kind of keynote red flag to look out for symptomatology wise is if people have had some basic lab tests and everything's normal. That's like where one should really, really go down a mold kind of diagnosis or a mold thought. But if you have any of these symptoms that I mentioned, mold is absolutely a possibility.
And what about digestion? You mentioned IBS originally. Does mold affect digestion?
Mold can definitely affect digestion. So mold can basically cause inflammation of the vagus nerve, and the vagus, the nerve is the nerve that helps to regulate our digestive tract. So that can be a big thing. Another thing that mold will do is mold can actually, through a complicated mechanism that we don't need to get into to keep it simple, but mold can actually slow down bile release and bile release from the liver. So this is going to impact somebody, like regardless if they have a gallbladder or not, it'll actually impact, since the liver makes the bile, that mold can actually prevent the release of bile from the liver. And that can lead to things like fat malabsorption, fatty stools, indigestion, anytime somebody eats fat. And there's also a link with the condition in the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. There's also a link between that and mold illness, basically people with SIBO having worse symptoms and a harder time getting over SIBO and more recurrent SIBO if they have mold and mycotoxins as well.
Explain SIBO.
So SIBO basically is an acronym. It's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so it's just like the acronym states, it's overgrowth. It's not really an infection, but what will happen is the bacteria that are common in the large intestine wind up migrating to the small intestine where they're not supposed to be, and they overpopulate. And that overpopulation of these microorganisms in the small intestine lead to a wide variety of symptoms, anything from gas, pain, constipation, diarrhea. And SIBO is now in research thought to be the number one cause of irritable bowel syndrome. So for people that have had a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms, but they don't have like a diagnosis other than IBS, or maybe they don't even have that diagnosis. It's just like, I have a lot of stuff going on in my gut. I've been told to take a stool softener or a laxative to help work with it, or maybe some Gas X. And that's basically what I've been told by my doctor. That's a really common reason to look at a small intestinal bacteria overgrowth diagnosis.
I'm like sitting here with my mouth open, like the doctor tells you to take a stool softener. First of all, if your stool is too hard, no, don't take a drug. Look at why it's hard, which is probably what you're putting in your mouth. Yes. First and foremost, here, take this pill for this thing. It's like, okay, stop. Why is it happening in the first place? Anyway, I could go on a tangent for a while. So let's talk about Lyme though. I want you to like the difference between mold. And I know there's more than one mold. We've talked about black mold, but let's talk about Lyme disease. Explain Lyme disease.
Yeah, so Lyme disease is a term for an infection from a bacteria called Borrelia. And for the longest time, we just thought Borrelia was a tick-borne infection. And in the beginning, we just thought that this tick-borne infection really was from Lyme, Connecticut, which is basically how the disease got named, from the area of the country that this particular bacteria was originally found in ticks. But now we're learning more and more about it's not just ticks that carry this particular bacteria. There's actually other insects such as mosquitoes. And it's not just in the East Coast like we thought. It's actually becoming a pretty wide world type of problem. So basically what winds up happening is we get an infection by an insect bite of some type. And this insect bite will actually give us everything that insect is carrying. So it's another thing that is important to understand, is that when insects bite us, it's not like they just give us the bacteria that causes Lyme, the Borrelia. They will give us the entire cocktail of all the other bacterias and fungus and parasites that they're carrying. So Lyme disease is classically a Borrelia infection, but most people with this Borrelia infection actually have multiple infections of whatever was delivered to them by that particular insect at that given time. And the symptom picture for Lyme and mold is fairly identical. In a textbook type of situation, one of the key differences is that Lyme pain migrates. So like the pains, if somebody's having pain from Lyme, pain might be in the hip one day and the shoulder the next, the knee the next, versus with mold, the pain is like more consistent, where it's like, wow, I just have shoulder pain or neck pain or head pain every day. So that's textbook, but of course, as humans, we are not textbooks. So I do see people with Lyme that kind of presents pain-wise more like a textbook mold and vice versa. But the symptom picture, I could literally go down and give you the exact list of symptoms for Lyme disease as I did with mold. And that's where the lab testing is super valuable because it kind of helps direct us to say, okay, well, is it Lyme? Is it mold? Is it both? Is it neither? And we have to continue to do more investigative work to figure out why.
Okay, so that leads me to the next question, because everyone in the world who's going to hear this cannot necessarily work with you, but they probably should. So anyone who's interested, we can talk about that and how they can contact you. Is it something they can bring to their doctor? Is it something that you think people would benefit doing it on their own first?
Oh man, I wish we had the entire day to go down this soapbox. It's so important. And so basically from a take this to your conventional doctor standpoint, there's some challenges. So one big challenge is that the conventional medical community has been very, very slow to accept this fact that chronic Lyme does exist. Even though now there's studies out that are showing this, a lot of docs are really still believing there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. So it's difficult depending upon where people are at, what type of doctors they have access to take this to their doctor and have their doctor take them seriously. And same for mold. A lot of people are really not connecting the dots yet. And again, we have research studies showing this and more coming out all the time. We need more research, but there are some studies that are absolutely linking this all together. So the other problem that is present when we're talking about bringing this to a conventional doc is the actual test that most classic docs are going to run. So for example, the common test that is run in Lyme disease is basically called an ELISA test. Now, ELISA test has been basically shown to produce at least 65% of false negatives. And this is the number one test that's run. So we have a test that's run that 65% of the time it's going to be a false negative. And then people are going to basically say, okay, well, this is not Lyme. Now, if it is positive, if we're lucky enough to get that information, then it's only going to be diagnosed with Lyme if a follow-up test called a Western blot is run. The problem with the Western blot that's being run by our classic standard companies that most practices are using is that the Western blot is only looking for one strain of Lyme. And there's a ton of strains of Lyme. So the first test is kind of crap. It's like 65% false negative. And then if you are lucky to get a positive, then you move on to the second test that is also done in a way where it's not very thorough. So what I tell people is like, if you want to start with testing with your conventional doc, if your conventional doc will at least take you seriously enough to test, it's reasonable, especially if it's going to be covered by insurance, it's reasonable to do this test and say, okay, well, if it's positive, great. A positive is a valid positive. And so we can take that and say, okay, well, this is data, but what we want to be very careful about doing is if we get a negative test, then saying it's negative, because we don't know that. There's so many false negatives. So we can rely on the positive, but we can't rely on the negative. And that's Lyme. Now, as far as mold is concerned, there's a couple different ways you can test mold. You can do a urinary mycotoxin test. Most conventional docs are probably not going to run that. One of the problems is that a lot of these tests for mold are done by specialty labs, and doctors don't tend to have accounts with these specialty labs, and they don't tend to like ordering tests they don't understand the results for, because then they're legally liable. And so that can be difficult to run. Now, running a test through a standard doc for mold called an HLA-DR, it should be an HLA-DR and a TGF beta 1 are really, really great mold markers. And those are tests that can be run accurately through your standard labs if you can get your conventional doc to do those orders for you.
Is there a resource like Life Extension that someone can go to get them and order them themselves?
Direct Labs. So if you go to directlabs.com, they have a lot of different labs that are direct to consumer. And I'm pretty sure you can get these types of labs on Direct Labs.
Okay. When you were talking about the false negative and the ELISA test and then the Western blot only giving you one strain, it reminded me of like when you try to diagnose thyroid by only testing TSH.
100%.
And you're not getting the T3, T4, T2, and you're not looking at the rest of the system. So, right. And how long since that TSA is that's like so big, right? The TSH, I'm sorry. The TSH is such a wide range that by the time you're out of it, like you've had thyroid problems for a long time. So yeah, it's not funny, but at least it's funny, but it's not funny. It's kind of sad, but at least people like you are out there educating us so that we can go back to our doctors and ask, or find new doctors, or go to direct labs, because just like life extension, we need a resource for those of us that want to spend the money and the time and the research to test ourselves, when people just trust that their doctors know best and they're human just like everybody else. And I'm not saying they're doing the best they can in many cases, but a lot of times that's just not enough. And there's a lot of research to prove that we are sicker than we ever have been. And we have a lot of more factors that, I think Dr. Northrup was on the show twice, and she talked about, I think 17 years is the time it takes to change a medicine paradigm. 17 years. By the time you add on the new information, it's already old. Right. So like we got to,
exactly.
Where functional medicine, integrative medicine is more up to date. You want to find a functional medicine integrative doctor, they're more up to date than Western medicine and conventional allopathic. So, all right. So now someone's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, I have these symptoms. Okay, I've done these tests. My doctor doesn't know what it is. They just think it's in my head. What do they do? Do they call you? Can you help?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. My practice is actively taking new patients, and we do work with people all over the country. We do sometimes even work with people internationally. The big challenge internationally is just making sure that we have ways of getting product to people that's going to help them. So some places like Europe are pretty easy. We have clients in the Philippines, and that's a little bit more of a extremely tricky thing to get them, quality products. So the biggest thing that I would say in treating this stuff is really working with somebody that understands mold, that understands Lyme, that's literate in both of these things, and then working with somebody that understands the whole body. Because one of the biggest challenges I see people get into when they're treating these things is even when they find them, it's like, hooray, we found things, we know what's going on. It's super exciting. And that's wonderful. But when we just go after the Borrelia, the bacteria that causes Lyme, and the other infections, and detox the mold toxins, the other environmental toxins, that's a great start. But there's so many areas of the body, and we have these imbalances that basically get disrupted. Our adrenal system, our digestive systems, our immune systems, our neurological systems. And so if we're just cleaning up the bad, but we're not actually going in to test and look holistically about all of the different tissues and glands that have been affected, we're really not doing a very good job. And it typically is very difficult to get somebody completely well without looking at the entire picture. So that's what we do at my office. And if it's not a good fit with my office, the other thing, and we would love to have you guys, so please just let us know. But if it's not the right fit, then the other thing I tell people to look out for is looking for people that are mold and Lyme literate, but also really looking for at least a team. Even if you're working with somebody that's mold and Lyme literate that doesn't understand the rest of the body, getting somebody that understands functional medicine on board, that's going to take a look at the whole body. And then also getting on somebody on board that is really going to help coach how you're thinking about this, the internal dialogue. So many times, and for me, as I imagine could have been true for you too, JJ, it's like so easy when we're not feeling well and we're sick. It's so easy for the mind to come over and say these thoughts like, I'm so sick, this is so hard, I'm never going to be well. And that actually is putting the body into the sympathetic, that fight or flight type of drive, which is not where our immune system works. So what we do at our clinic, and we encourage people to do this with us or with somebody else, is find that person that's going to really help dissect how to transform the internal workings of the mind, because that needs to be addressed just like the body. It's all part of the healing process. And so I think in getting somebody well, it's really looking holistically and looking at all of the imbalances, mind, body, including mold and Lyme, but beyond mold and Lyme.
We have a new book coming out, as we talked about earlier, Use Your Mind to Heal Your Mold and Lyme. And I know you're doing like a launch, and you're actually giving it away for free. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But before we get to, and you also have a 14-day happiness challenge that when I looked at that was cool. And definitely my people would love that. Anytime we do any kind of challenge, I have a 30-day manifestation challenge, which is similar in its result, right? Like it's about putting your emotions on the top of your important to-do list every day and getting yourself into a high frequency frequency and vibration that you can do deliberately every day. So you don't feel like you need something to change to experience these feelings. But a 14-day happiness challenge might appeal more to other people. It's less time. And I'm sure you do different practices than I do. But before we get to your launch and your new book, are there any standard home detox supplements, something you would recommend that if someone's having these symptoms and they have this intuitive hit that it may be mold, is there something safe they can do to try and see if it alleviates any of the symptoms?
Absolutely. I can give a couple recommendations, and I want to do so with a little bit of a caveat, which is in giving these recommendations, I want to be very careful that people are not assuming that, oh, I tried these things and they didn't do anything, so it must not be mold, it must not be Lyme. The process of working with these disease processes it's complicated, and there's a lot of different components of how to do this effectively and uniquely, right? Because depending upon the unique combination of what mold toxin somebody may have, what other infections, imbalances, the protocols are always going to look a little bit different. And I know the importance of being self-empowered and wanting to try things and wanting to, move forward as quickly as possible. So from a detox perspective, very, very simple things are amazing. So simple things from taking an Epsom salt bath and allowing oneself to sit in there till you're getting, really, really warm. So you're actually almost sweating. We also know that we do see toxins in sweat. Mycotoxins have actually been found in sweat, even not in sauning. Like sauning is great. If you have access to, like an infrared type of sauna, that's wonderful. But even just getting your body to sweat will release toxins. So doing some of those basic things, also breath work. I cannot, the more and more I study breath work and the way that we breathe is so impactful to our immune system, our nervous system, but also making sure that we are truly properly oxygenating our tissues. There's so many disease processes that are happening in part just because the mitochondria, the powerhouse of our cell, don't have energy because of oxygen deprivation. So doing exercises, for example, like inhaling, exhaling normally, holding one's breath out of the exhale as long as possible. But then here's the most important part of this exercise. So make sure everybody's listening to this part, which is after you hold the breath after the exhale, it's really, really important that inhale is natural. So you don't want to do this really, really, really deep inhale or this fast inhale. That actually makes the breathing pattern not reset to a more healthy oxygenating pattern. So you basically want to hold your breath as long as you can, and when you can still take a very natural, calm, relaxed inhale. And so just practicing that. So those are a few just basic home remedies. Other basic things for detoxification, more from a supplement standpoint, it's really good to use a binder. We get toxins out in our stool. Our liver basically puts them into the bile. The bile goes into the small intestine and we basically poop them out. And what happens is through that process, oftentimes we reabsorb them. They make their way into the intestinal tract and then we actually reabsorb them into our bloodstream. They don't wind up in our stool. So a binder is simply something that's going to bind essentially the toxin in the intestinal tract when it gets there. So you can basically poop it out. And so binders that are really great are things like activated charcoal is a really great one, pretty safe one. There's a lot of different binders I could say that I'm not going to say because the brands are very, very, some of these binders actually, if they're not good brands, they actually have toxins in them because they bind toxins in the environment. So just getting random binders off the store is a little bit cautionary and needs more attention to just rattle them off. But activated charcoal I can talk about because that's a pretty safe binder that you can get at, health food stores and get it very, very safely without worrying about toxins. And then glutathione is just a very wonderful, glutathione is such a great antioxidant. It's one of our most potent detoxifiers. Liposomal is one of the best absorbed forms of glutathione, but for those that can't get a liposomal, there's another form of oral glutathione called S-acetylglutathione, and S-acetylglutathione has been shown to do very, very well of making its way in the bloodstream. Just straight up glutathione without that S-acetyl component to it doesn't seem to do as well. So that would be a good kind of basic protocol. But again, just to kind of re-emphasize that we really want to be careful that if you're doing this and you're well, I'm not noticing a difference, it doesn't mean that you don't still need mold treatment. It just means that, hey, we need to really develop this treatment a little bit broader.
Well, there is nothing in what you just offered that wouldn't just be beneficial anyway. So,
absolutely.
so if we're not doing all of these things, and I'm going to put exercise in there for the sweating component also, then add these to your regimen and see what happens. But of course, reach out, and all the links I'm going to mention are in the show notes. Your clinic is called Medicine with Heart. So you can go to medicinewithheart.com. Let's talk about quickly, and I'll put the 14-day happiness challenge in there, but let's talk about your book and the book launch.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm so excited. So I have a 5-day educational summit leading up to the book launch. So interviewing experts from all over the world, actually, in Lyme and mold and functional medicine and health in general. And so that's going to be really exciting. And then the book will actually be launched on May 24th and then May 24th and May 25th. So the first 2 days of the launch, I'm actually giving the book away for free, the ebook version of the book. So I'm really, the whole point of this is to really get this book out into as many people's hands as possible. It really is looking at a lot of the challenges. I call it a survivor's guide, because a lot of what we're doing with it is we're looking at the physical side of things, what tests are needed, all sorts of information about treatment from a whole body perspective, but also how do we work on the mind and why is it really important? So there's a lot of like supportive care exercises that are built into the book to really say, okay, start here. This is a really basic supportive care exercise to begin to understand how the mind is affecting the health, and then building from there into daily practices that don't take a lot of time, that don't take a lot of effort, but that can have profound results. I have a chapter in there called doctor hopping, when to hop and when to stop. So really looking at how to analyze a clinic, what questions to ask when you're trying to find a provider, what answers you're looking for from them to know they're the right person for you to work with, when you should continue to stay with a doctor because, hey, maybe you're running through a challenge, but this person is still able to help you versus like, you know what, it's time to get out of here. So it's really looking at some of these challenges from treating these complex chronic diseases from a patient perspective and really analyzing what is missing, how to help somebody and support somebody in thinking through the process from the very beginning of finding a good doc all the way to I am healthy and well, and what do I do next? And the other thing that I'd love to share about it that I'm really excited about with it is the first couple of weeks, like once it does go into full sale mode, we're actually taking 100% of the profits and we're putting it into a scholarship fund where those that truly cannot afford treatment, there will be an application process and people will have to prove income eligibility, but people that do that and apply for it and are income eligible will actually be able to use the money out of the scholarship fund to pay for their labs, to pay for their supplements, to pay for their treatments if they can't afford it. And the same thing with the summit. That's what we're doing with the proceeds from the summit as well. So really using this as almost like a crowdfunding event, like giving to people, helping them, and then utilizing the money that comes into us to basically put back into supporting the community that needs this work.
Beautiful. And I'm excited to be a part of the summit. So that will be awesome. Hopefully, guys, you'll hear about that through the email and in social media posts as well. So definitely want to invite you to participate in the summit. But to get your free book, okay, it's just 2 days. It's the 24th and the 25th of May, 2021. You're going to go to jjflizanes.com/mold. Now, this link will be in the show notes. So if you're driving or exercising, just check out the click, like see more and click down below. So it's jjflizanes.com/mold will take you to get the free book, the Use Your Mind to Heal Your Mold and Lyme. It'll be free for 2 days. Of course, after that, it's Diane was saying, it's going to be an amazing way to give back. So even if you buy the book, you're contributing to somebody else's healing journey. And also, let's talk quickly about the 14-day happiness challenge.
Yeah. So I think with, what you're sharing about your own challenge or 30-day challenge, I think it's like these two things I think are just going to pair so well together, right? It's 14 days and it's guiding people through research, research-based studies in the beginning. So just kind of getting the mind on board in the beginning as far as, wow, what we think actually can affect. So like there's research that's showing that a positive thought versus a negative thought about the exact same external situation can actually change our hormones, can change the way our immune system functions. So at first, in the first couple days, we start with some of the research to really help the brain understand and get the belief system on board about the power of the mind. Because when the belief system's on board, of course, as I know, it affects things so much more deeply. And then from there, it's basically exercises every day, very, very short, very easy to implement. And we talk in there too about some of the science of habits. And so as we're trying to bring in new exercises to really look at at changing the mind, we actually look at some of the research on, okay, well, if we're going to put in a habit, for example, of let's meditate for 5 minutes a day, or let's do a gratitude exercise for 5 minutes a day. How do humans actually make these habit changes that don't fall away like New Year's resolutions? So how do we actually put these practices that are helping us with make our happiness? How do we put them into our lives in the way that actually lasts? And so we look at that sort of research. So we actually help people develop the strategies around bringing the new information and the new activities into their life to develop the strategies to actually allow these new habits to actually stick. So that's the other part of the challenge that's really, really cool. And that information, can be applied to any habit in life that we want to change, not just our state of, our mood and our state of happiness.
So that link is going to be jjflizanes.com/happy, jjflizanes.com/happy to get access to the 14-day happiness challenge. Dr. Diane, this has been great. I am so excited to get your book. I'm so excited to look at all the things that you have to offer, because as I move forward on my own health journey, working with other people and wanting to know more and more about how we can contribute to cleaning out not only our bodies, but our houses and our homes of any of these environmental toxins that cause us these negative symptoms. I think it's so powerful. And I haven't had anybody on the show really talking about environment to this degree. So I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to seeing you at the summit.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be interviewing you on the summit and having you as part of it. And this has been wonderful for me too. So thanks again for having me and hosting me.